Hello everyone, Father Scott Vanderveer here with a continuation of what we started talking about last week with the weeds in our garden. All of us have a garden that is filled with crops that we're trying to cultivate for God and for the world. But we also have to deal with weeds that are in our garden that we wish we could just exterminate. We wish that we had some kind of product that could get rid of them. But what we're taught is having weeds in our garden is the best way for us to understand what it means to deal with original sin. Every garden has weeds. It's impossible to eradicate them all. So this brings us into the deeper level of this discussion because Pope Francis said something a couple of years ago that made me think so deeply, and it's something that all of us have something to really wrestle with. He says, God has no problem with our sins. Our sins are not a problem for God. Jesus came to die on the cross for our sins. God understands our sins. Being sinful is not the problem. It's okay that we're sinful. But corruption, no. It is okay to be a sinful human being. It is never okay to be corrupt. What's the difference between being sinful and being corrupt? Well, all of us are sinful. All of us have weeds in our garden. Maybe they're weeds of anger or of pride. Maybe we care too much about our outer appearance, or we have a hard time telling the truth when we're in a pickle. Maybe we're prone to envy, or we get greedy around money. Maybe we let fear rule our life, or we don't know how to say no to the food and drink that's in front of us when we've had enough. Maybe we deal with not respecting other people's bodies, or we get lazy when we really should be forging ahead with a task that God has given us. Those are the weeds. Those sins, that's part of being human. Corruption is when we start doubting the rules that God has given us, or that the rules apply to us. Sin is something that when we look at our behavior, we say, oh man, there I go again. I did it again. I wish I weren't so weak. I wish I could have said no to that. Corruption is when you start saying, why should that be wrong? Who says it's wrong? The Bible? Who wrote the Bible? My parents say it's wrong. I wasn't raised with those values. Well, maybe they were wrong. When we start thinking, yeah, that rule is good for most people, but I'm kind of in a hurry here, or I'm more important, or I'm not worried about it. Nobody's looking. Sins are a natural outgrowth of human weakness. We don't know why they're here. Not till heaven will we understand. But when we are aware that our sins are the sign that we don't always measure up to the goal or to our ideal or to our potential, we're just being human. When we start saying, maybe the goal's wrong, maybe this is my fullest potential, maybe God doesn't have a right to ask anything of me. Who is God to ask anything of me or give me any expectations? So when we question ourselves because of our behavior, there's a good chance that what's going on is sin. When we question the rule, there's a good chance that we're flirting with corruption. Don't you think that's a really helpful distinction? I'm so grateful to Pope Francis for helping to iron that out. Sin and corruption are not the same. And when we are honest with ourselves about our sins, we are on good ground with God. God does not mind the fact that we have sins. So let's talk about this, because there is a chance for us to bring in another voice to the conversation, and that's the voice of psychology. For the past 100 years, psychologists have been talking about the fact that every human being has a shadow side. That's good psychology and it's good theology. That shadow side is the original sin that's in us. And what we hear is there's no problem with having a shadow. It's natural. It's part of being human. The problem is if we try to deny our shadow. If you want to know what your shadow is, if you're married, it's the stuff that drives your spouse crazy. Maybe it's that you're stubborn. Or maybe it's that you have a pattern of ignoring something that needs to be tended to, but you always look the other way because you're trying to avoid it. Maybe it has to do with a tendency toward flying off the handle, or a tendency toward being a know-it-all, or withdrawing during an argument. Fine, you're always right, rather than being willing to work it out. I think married people have a real advantage because the other person in the marriage doesn't allow the shadow to go unnoticed. It's only unnoticed while you're still in love. Once the 7-year itch comes, and it's not because of poison ivy, it's because I'm with this person for the rest of my life and I just realized all that means. Well, that's when we start to realize, yeah, my shadow is evident. It is showing. It's difficult for us to know that our shadow is showing. I know for me, road rage is one of the manifestations of my shadow side. And I've got a few friends who've been in the car with me to notice it. Most of the time as a priest, I'm driving alone. So when I'm like, at somebody's driving, I'm the only one to know my reaction. But sometimes, like on a road trip, I'll be with a friend and they'll say, aren't you following a little closely? Did you just cut that person off? And I'm like, I didn't cut them off. They're going so slowly. I'm just trying to get around. You know what I'm saying? So that shadow is something that we are meant to acknowledge and deal with. The temptation will always be not to acknowledge or deal with it, but to try to deny it. And psychologists and confessors agree. Do not deny the shadow. That is where the danger is. Just when we think that we're getting out of the rapids of the parts of our life that we don't like, and we try to go over to the shallows on the side of the creek, that's where we realize that's where the crocodiles are. When we start denying that there's rough water going on for us. And actually, the crocodiles are not the best metaphor. The best metaphor is given to us by a spiritual author who says that our shadow side is like a beach ball. Picture an inflatable beach ball. That's our shadow. Now, what we do when we are trying to conceal our shadow from the world is we take our beach ball and we try to submerge it in a tub full of water. Now, picture what that would feel like. Picture how it would feel to have a beach ball that you want to keep under the water. Now, can you picture how the air in that beach ball keeps wanting it to rise? And so we're trying to keep it down. And the goal is to keep it down beneath the surface of the water. But the resistance of that beach ball is trying to pop up. We can do a good job keeping it beneath the surface as long as our attention is focused on it, as long as we're well rested and not distracted. But as soon as we get distracted and we're trying to keep this ball beneath the surface of the water, but we try reaching for something else, up it comes out of the water. And it makes a splash. And the splash is embarrassing because there's our shadow. It just splashed in front of everybody. Isn't that such a good analogy? Here's where it goes one step further. The more you're trying to push your shadow beneath the surface, the bigger the splash will be when it gets away from you and pops up out of your hands. Haven't you seen that with politicians? The politicians who have their head hung the most are the ones who fought something very flagrantly in the public eye, and they were caught doing some version of it themselves in their private life. Do you remember we had a governor who did that? He was always out there trying to look for corruption and trying to root out immoral people. He was even trying to break up a prostitution ring in New York City. And then when he became governor, it turned out that he had a pattern of visiting prostitutes. Do you see what was happening? Trying to keep the shadow side under the surface. And you know the best way to keep your shadow under the surface if you're out of balance? To try to divert people's attention away from the fact that you have it by saying, no, look over there. He's got a beach ball. She's got a beach ball. So then we think that that works because we draw people's attention to the sins of the other and the shadow of the other. But guess what happens? That just means that as soon as the beach ball pops up, that splash is going to cause us the most possible embarrassment. It would have been embarrassing enough for a politician to be caught doing something immoral and unethical. But if it is the very thing that he spoke against, just think of how overwhelming that shame is. So friends, I am so grateful to Pope Francis for giving us this lens that we can look at. It is okay to have a beach ball of shadow. We just have to stop trying to hide it. It's okay to have weeds in our garden. Everyone has weeds in their garden. Jesus came to help us with our weeds, to tell us, you don't have to keep weeding that bit by bit by bit. Let me come and let my saving love do the work for you. It is not a problem to be wrestling with the struggles of your life. It's not a problem to have a dark side or a shadow. The problem comes when we deny that it's there, and one of our coping mechanisms is to try to hide it and blame others, or to try to doubt that the rule was okay in the first place. It won't work. Let's just admit that we are a mixed bag, a mixed grill of good and not so good, of kind and not so kind, of holy and sinful. And God seems to love us this way, just the way we are. May God continue to bless you as you go on cultivating the garden of your life.